Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ojaba.
It's a little redundant of me to comment again on the music and the vibe and the feel from that Force Awakens trailer that I use in the intro of the show. Welcome to episode 141 of a Star Wars podcast here on My Nerd World. I am Jon Justice. It's still quiet right now when it comes to episode 9, right? We are just a few days away from the physical release of Solo, a Star Wars story, so that makes sense. And based off of some information that we also have now, which we'll get into, I don't anticipate, at least at the moment, I don't anticipate we're going to get anything official for a little while on episode 9. But the point that I wanted to make is that trailer that I'm going to reference, that is part of the intro, I love the romanticism in the way that the music is presented in that trailer, right? Again, that's an edit for the intro of the show, and every single time I play it by itself, if I don't put something beforehand, right, in front of it, it just really, it really gets to me. I mean, like on an emotional level for a brief period of time. And obviously I'm looking forward to episode 9, but I'm really looking forward to the marketing of episode 9. It would be, and I've mentioned this before, but it would be stupid of Disney to not play on the fact that this is the final installment. Right? I'm not going to repeat everything I said a few podcasts ago, but I'm really, really looking forward to what that promotion is going to look like, and hoping that they really key in on this being the end of the saga and bringing that romanticism back into it. The way that Han and Leia's theme just flows so well in that trailer. And that's the one thing about the marketing of The Last Jedi. I loved the full trailer for The Last Jedi. Didn't care for the teaser. I thought the teaser lacked a bit compared to what we got in The Force Awakens, but the full trailer I thought was spot on. That was a fantastic trailer. But that was really playing off of story beats less than Star Wars nostalgia. And JJ does that very, very well. He hits that nostalgia button, perfectly almost every single time. I mean, he did it in Star Trek too. The opening of the 2010 reboot of Star Trek, I think is brilliant. I love that opening where you just get a really close up of the Federation ship. I forgot what the name of it was that his dad was on. The Federation ship and the Kelvin. And then it kind of flips, and you get the familiar Star Trek. You get that. I just thought he nailed it, and he certainly nailed it with the Force Awakens. All right, on the show this week, going to do something that I don't normally do on the show, and we're going to talk a little bit about. Well, I don't want to say box office so much because that's not what we're going to be focusing in on. What we're going to be focusing in on is the creative side of Star Wars and what we can expect in the future. Bob Iger. Talking to, I believe it was the Hollywood Reporter. Let me pull this up. Yeah, from the Hollywood Reporter. Bob Iger made some pretty bold comments about Solo's box office for performance and the future of the Star Wars films. Okay, and this has caused a riff in the fandom just of people talking about it. I mean, and there's a lot of people in the fandom that are taking credit, saying, "Hey, look, we won," and Iger admits he sucks, and okay, not by in so many words, but we're gonna get into that. I want to give you my thoughts on what Bob Iger is saying and what it means for the future of Star Wars and whether or not, in my opinion, it's a good or bad thing. Then what I want to talk about is I'm going to play you a chunk of audio from the Empire Film podcast, Empire Magazine. They did a multi-part interview with Christopher McQuarrie, who directed Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. He did Mission Impossible Fallout. That's what this interview is in reference to. Jack Reacher. I believe he also did some ghostwriting on Rogue One, if I'm not mistaken. There's an interesting moment at the beginning of the interview where Christopher McQuarrie gives some insight that I had never heard before about the creative process. And this is over at Paramount. I think that there's a very specific reason, and this is evidence of that in my opinion, of how and why The Last Jedi got made. Okay? And why, apart from Rian Johnson's kind demeanor, but why Rian Johnson was given the creative freedom that he was given to make The Last Jedi. Because there's some very interesting points that Christopher McQuarrie makes about the studio process, about the current state of fandom, and about movie-going habits. And what we'll land on in talking about that is, I think we are oddly in a very similar place. The movie-going public at large is in a very similar place that they were prior to the blockbuster coming to fruition. Jaws and Star Wars, arguably in tandem upon releases, created the blockbuster. Before that, movie-going wasn't deemed a must-do experience that people were talking about the next day, where nobody was going out and really lining up, right? The term blockbuster, people lining up on the street, breaking blocks of roads, communities, this kind of thing. At the time, you didn't have that. You just kind of went to the movies if something interested you. Star Wars and Jaws, they changed all that. And if you track the movie-going audience, the types of films that get made, what it ends up becoming more popular, you can see the arc starting with those films in the late 70s. You can see how the action genre took off based off of the movies that were most popular prior to Star Wars. And I think that we are, in an odd way, back to where we were prior to the blockbuster. So we're going to spend some time on that. Okay, I'm going to play you that audio. And I think it speaks to why The Last Jedi got made and what we can expect, perhaps, based off of that, from Episode 9 in the future of Star Wars. Also, time permitting, we do have a handful of your emails and YouTube comments. Hopefully we have a chance to get into some listener feedback. So let's go ahead and let's get right into it.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Yes, we have, and it means that Bob Iger has spoken to the media again and opened up a can of worms with his comments, not realizing that he's going to turn the fandom on its head. Bob Iger's not a weird dude, like I think he's a normal guy, but his ability to uproot the fandom and get them talking for hours on end based off of a few comments is really quite incredible. I remember how people reacted when he made some comments about Solo and saying that we're going to find out what the origin of Solo's name was, and everybody kind of wigged out and commentary was done. I did commentary on it. Most of us landed on, well, that he wasn't speaking literally, because that would be stupid. Well, then, of course, we watched the movie and find out that, no, he actually kind of gave us a spoiler. We did absolutely find out how he got his last name. I didn't mind it. I thought it was cool. I thought it was awesome. All right. So, talking with The Hollywood Reporter, here's what he had to say. The question was this: many believe Disney should pump the brakes and not put out a Star Wars movie each year. So Bob Iger says this: I made the timing decision, and as I look back, I think the mistake that I made, I take the blame, was a little too much, too fast. You can expect some slowdown. That doesn't mean we're not going to make films. J.J. Abrams is busy making Episode 9. We have creative entities, including Game of Thrones creators David Benioff and D.B. Wise, who are developing sagas of their own, which we haven't been specific about. And we are at the point where we're going to start making decisions about what comes after JJ's. But I think we're going to be a little more careful about the volume and timing, and the buck stops here on that. Okay. What I think that this means is, I think we're down to a movie a year. I think that for a number of reasons, and we'll get into it again, because I think it's interesting in light of these comments from Christopher McQuarrie that I'm going to get into here in a moment, what that means for Solo and its box office success. And again, we're going to go down that road. I don't normally go down that road, but we're going to talk about it. I think that this means we're going to be getting a Star Wars movie a year. There's no reason why Disney and Lucasfilm can't do a Star Wars film a year. I think that 2, in their minds, not in mine, but in their minds, is too much. And maybe Solo was an example of that. The other thing is, Solo was so unique that, it's almost like the Solo release and how that came about was almost like catching lightning in a bottle in a bad way. The circumstances surrounding that film from beginning to end, you weren't on a trajectory. They lucked out with Rogue One. Solo was doomed to be on a trajectory where it was going to be a struggle across the board by the time it reached the box office. And so I think, I can't imagine a world where Disney's not putting out a film a year, but no more than that. Maybe they can build up like they did with Marvel to the level where you get your Marvel saga films and then your spin-off films. But, the Star Wars fandom is very unique and very different and is getting older, and those things are changing. And what makes Star Wars great, and a lot of people point this out, and I tend to agree, is the anticipation of waiting for a new film and the hype that surrounds that and builds up to that. I think the biggest mistake, let me just go here for a second. The biggest mistake that Disney and Lucasfilm made, and we'll just say Disney, and if Bob Iger's taking the blame here, we'll blame it on Bob Iger. And I've got a lot more to say about what he had to say, because people are making hay about what wasn't mentioned, and I think that's a ridiculous path to go down. But I think that Disney and Lucasfilm made a mistake in underestimating the audience, and they should have ran a Solo teaser before The Last Jedi. That's just, it wouldn't have diminished the movie watching experience for The Last Jedi. A lot of us were expecting to see that. And the thing of it is, and I'll just speak for me, I know that when I consume, and again, I've mentioned this before, but when I consume content that I really enjoy, I want to consume more of it that's out there. For example, I went and saw The Predator last weekend, and I liked it. It's a big, dumb, goofy sci-fi movie. It's Shane Black. It's about what I expected. But I really wanted to consume more Predator content because I just got done watching a movie that I enjoyed. So, that weekend I went home and watched I watched Predators, which I own. And I actually went back and kind of, through the course of a few days, because it's not a good film, I watched Predators 2. And again, not a good film. But that's how I am when it comes to how I can go and consume content. And so, leaving The Last Jedi and then knowing, okay, we've seen this movie now we can dissect it, now we can break it down, we get things to talk about. But there is that, okay, what's next? Because you have a long wait until we get Episode 9. Well, having Solo parked right there at that moment of time really would have been cool. To just have that lingering there. No, man, we're in the middle of enjoying this awesome new Star Wars movie, Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and oh my gosh, we've already got a teaser for Solo. I think that's where they could have kept the momentum going, and they didn't. They waited for the hype to die down before they hit a subside with Solo, and unfortunately, because of what ended up happening, and again, this is that negative lightning in a bottle. What ended up happening was so much of the commentary surrounding The Last Jedi after it came out, it didn't lend itself very well going into Solo. I think if they had gotten started early, it could have buffered that a bit, and maybe even, created a scenario where you had people that were down on The Last Jedi, but were watching the Solo stuff going, all right, I know I didn't like The Last Jedi for my myriad of reasons. Rian Johnson, it's all your fault. Stupidest thing ever, by the way. I can't believe how many people use that, by the way. Oh, you get it? We're going to call him Rian Johnson because he ruined Star Wars, and it's like Ryan, but we changed his first name, and Ruin's bad. So it's like a really sick burn. So dumb. But I think it could have given the opportunity for people like that, no offense if that's you, to go, all right, I didn't like The Last Jedi, but I am getting the Solo movie coming up, and I am looking forward to that. All right, so back to what else Bob Iger had to say. Okay. We have creative entities. So let me say up front, just because he didn't mention Rian Johnson doesn't mean that Rian Johnson's trilogy isn't moving forward. We know that he's directing a movie with the James Bond guy. His name escapes me right now, and I'm not going to think deep enough to remember because I don't really care all that much. Although I do enjoy those. I do enjoy those films quite a bit. Oh, and I remember it. Daniel Craig. All right, so we know that Rian Johnson is doing a movie with Daniel Craig, so he's going to be busy with some stuff in between before they get kicked up into production for Star Wars. And when you consider that, I think he's shooting that over the course of the next year. I mean, we're still in production on Episode 9, so, he can get started on the new Star Wars movies, like at the end of next year, right before, Episode 9 comes out, and he'd still be, timing-wise, will be just fine. All right, so he says, we have creative entities, okay? We're not, doesn't mean we're not going to make films. We have creative entities, including the Game of Thrones guys, Benioff and Weiss, developing sagas of their own, which we haven't been specific about. Okay, we are just at the point where we're gonna start making decisions about what comes next after JJ's. Okay, so I think if you're gonna read anything into it, the only thing I think you can possibly read into it is, again, one, probably a movie a year, but two, maybe you could say, I bet the Game of Thrones sagas are coming before we get the Rian Johnson movies. That's my only guess on that. Other than that, just because he didn't mention Rian Johnson doesn't mean that movie's not going to get. That doesn't mean those movies aren't going to get made. It just wasn't top of his mind, and it probably is further down the road than what they realize. And some people were even making comments about the fact that Kathleen Kennedy wasn't mentioned in this, and that doesn't bode well for her. Just stop reading into it. He was asked a question. It's not like he had a cheat sheet of all the things he had to check off to make sure that he mentioned every single entity that was being made. He just answered, and that happened to be top of mind. Now, is it a good thing that Star Wars is going to go and slow down? Look, it depends on what you want. Okay, I'm okay with waiting. I like the anticipation, especially because we're going to be getting a whole bunch of other content anyways. We're going to have the Resistance cartoon here, starts in just a couple of weeks. Jon Favreau's live-action TV show that's going to land sometime next year. And I imagine that we'll hopefully be doing seasons upon seasons every year. So when we get past Episode 9 at the end of next year, the following year, if there's not a movie planned, then we do have the live-action TV show. Although, again, I think we're still going to get a movie a year. But I think that's going to be it. What will be very intriguing goes without saying, whatever we find out about whatever the next movies are in the wake of Solo. Because I do think that we're going to be looking more at creating sagas than we are spin-off movies, unless we're talking about an Obi-Wan movie, which everybody seemingly wants so desperately. It'll be fascinating to see how Disney handles creating the new mythology. Because that's the driving force in all of this, in my opinion. It is the force. I mean, it is. The force that runs through Star Wars is cemented in part by nostalgia, and it's cemented in part by a saga and a through line that we can discuss, that we can break down, that we can pontificate on. It's why, in my opinion, Game of Thrones does so well. The world building in Game of Thrones is great. You got a lot of great characters. You want to watch this saga play out. Spin-off movies can be fun, but they can only just be spin-off movies. And what Marvel has been so good at doing is weaving in just enough in their spin-off films to tie into the larger story that it does give you something to chew on with those. Solo, unfortunately, didn't do that because I don't think we're going to get a sequel. Right? The Darth Maul introduction at the end of the film, while I enjoyed it, unfortunately doesn't ultimately get a payoff beyond the movie because we're probably not going to see that again, which is unfortunate. And that wasn't necessarily the plan. As we talked about last week with John Kasdan, he had very much mentioned how that was not the end of Kira and Solo and Darth Maul's story, and he would like to tell more. On woulda, coulda, if it was my world, what would you have done? I still would have, and again, this is not a complaint, just my opinion. I still think that if you had made Snoke that appearance at the end of Solo, that would have been huge. Now, I imagine they didn't because they have other creative plans for Snoke, in which case putting him at the end of Solo wouldn't have made sense. However, if they didn't have any plans for Snoke, that would have been cool to me. It would have added some depth, some layers to the Solo story, to the connection with Ben Solo moving forward, with Han. That makes all the sense in the world, but they didn't go that route, and that's totally fine. I do know on a news front, Marvel did put out a release for next year of a series of comic books based in all three eras. So the prequels, and then we have the original trilogy era. So they called it I forgot what they called it. It was the prequels, Rebels, and Resistance eras, if I remember correctly. I'm probably getting the prequel one wrong. But there is going to be a book or a couple of books on Snoke, and for next year slated. I'm really, really looking forward to that. And I think I think once Rian Johnson went down the road that he went, spoiler alert, in dealing with Snoke the way that he did, that really sort of cemented, okay, we're going to handle Snoke in a backstory. So, getting back to what I was saying, I'm really, really curious to see how Disney and Lucasfilm handle creating new sagas and tapping into that part of the fandom that is desperate for the mythology to continue, but without having the benefit of being tied to the original saga and the core characters that we've grown to love and have loved for decades in the prequels, the original trilogy, and the sequel trilogy. All right, let's get to this next portion of the show and this audio that I told you that I wanted to share with you.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
And for this portion of the show, that person that's going to show us our place in all this is Christopher McQuarrie. All right, listen to this. This, again, is an interview done just a couple of weeks ago after the release of excuse me, I work in Minneapolis, Mission Impossible Fallout. This is director Christopher McQuarrie talking with Empire Magazine. I was listening to this audio on the drive to work and thought it was just incredibly interesting, given so much controversy in the fandom among a minority about The Last Jedi and the creative freedom that Rian Johnson had and why that whole production went so smoothly by everybody at Lucasfilm's standards compared to even The Force Awakens, but certainly Solo and certainly Rogue One. Here, listen to this interview again from the Empire Film Podcast.
That's interesting, mate. Let me ask you, because I listened to our previous podcast, all 4.5 days of it, and at one point, I think it was on the fourth day, you said that you went to the marketing department of Paramount before you made Rogue Nation.
Yes.
And you said to them, guys, I'm paraphrasing here wildly, Chris, but I don't know what I'm doing, and I need you to tell me what you want from a movie in terms of marketing
Tell me how to make
materials.
a Mission Impossible movie.
Did you do that in this one, or did you know, okay, I'm going to do something completely different, I'm going to tell you what I'm doing this time?
We went in, sat down, had the same conversation, and this time they brought out a demographic sheet that they had not showed me on the last movie, and it showed me that the young male demographic in this movie, the under 25 demographic, men and women, had peaked at Mission Impossible 2. And
Really?
it actually had declined film over film until we reached Rogue Nation, where you were talking about they were It was less than 20%. It was a smaller number. I think I want to say it was even less than that. And I said, guys, if you chart this decline, we're talking about, for this next movie, 12% of the audience. And of that 12%, how many of those are going to be under the age of 17? It's an even smaller percentage. So why are we even chasing after this group? Why aren't we making a more grown-up movie for people? Yeah. And you look at the success of Logan, you look at the success of Deadpool. That's not a fluke. That's an audience that is saying we want tougher, more grown-up fare. Yeah. We want more sophisticated movies. And the truth is, we're getting that at home. We're not getting it in movie theaters. And that's why I look at that model. I say, well, I get the blockbuster thing. You want that, and those are the only movies that are going to get you to that place where you're making $1 billion. You're part of a multinational corporation. You have to have those red letter days. But isn't there a strata that they can have where they're making more consistently $60 million R-rated movies for the people who are actually coming to see movies? Yeah. It's also, I think the value of that is that's a farm system for your bigger movies. I think we've talked about this before. Yeah. My trajectory as a director to a movie on the level of something like Rogue Nation or Fallout started with Way of the Gun, Jack Reacher, rewriting Mission Impossible, rewriting Edge of Tomorrow, working Second Unit and Splinter Unit on those movies. That's not really the normal trajectory for directors to go from to go through. That's not the farm system that exists right now. Yeah. If you cultivated your directors through a system that also exploited a paying audience that is older and going to see movies and has an emotional connection to going to see movies, that's another element of this, is that my kids and their friends don't have – my kids do because I'm a movie nerd and I drag them to the theater. Their friends don't really think of going to the movies as a thing to do. Yeah. It's not a reflex action. Yeah. When you ask them why do they go to see movies, they'll tell you the same thing 5 different ways, but it's all the same thing. They go because they have to go. They go because everybody's going to be talking about whatever movie they're going to see on Monday, and they want to be part of the conversation. And so that you have to factor that into your filmmaking if you want to make a film for a younger audience. So I came to this this is all a long way of saying I came to it with complete duality. One was, I'm going to make a film for younger audiences, and I don't care if the younger audience is coming or not, because I can't chase after that. I've got to, I got to be me. And hopefully somewhere in there came out a movie that they're compelled to see. This decision to make Fallout, that happened on Rogue Nation, right? Yes. Yeah. At what point on Rogue Nation did you know? Well, I made the tremendous mistake of coming up with.
All right, let's go ahead and we'll stop it there. All right, so there's a couple of things in that, and there was more discussion too about the creative process in that interview before they got into the details of the movie that Christopher McQuarrie was talking about in Mission Impossible Fallout. But I found it interesting that they were presented with, and we know they have it right. They're presented with all this data that shows the trajectory of the films, and when zeroing in to make a movie like Fallout, there's a big portion of the conversation where they talk about how they actually go and break the cycle of expectations when it comes to Mission Impossible movies. They were still Mission Impossible films, but they decided to make them a little bit different and handle them a little bit differently and not exactly hit the exact beats of the other movie. They were going to break the cycle a bit. And why? Well, the demographics were showing that the movie-going audience was clamoring and is clamoring for some older fare. They want something different. They want their expectations, right, to be somewhat shattered. Now, I don't doubt that Rian Johnson is very easy to get along with based off of everything that we've heard, based off everything that we've seen in the in the footage of the making of the film, he just looks like a guy that goes in there, does what he needs to do, and doesn't spend a lot of time bickering and fighting and gets along with everybody. But I also think that Disney and Lucasfilm knew that with, again, these are all things that we kind of already knew, but to me, that audio really points to, okay, they're getting at the heart of this is really some actual evidence of what's happening. Disney and Lucasfilm needed to reestablish Star Wars. Disney needed to reestablish Star Wars after the prequels, for all the reasons that we all know. And that's what The Force Awakens was designed to do. Bring in J.J. Abrams, don't reboot it, continue telling the story, but let's give the fans let's hit them upside the head with the nostalgia that they so desperately want. And that's clear in the promotion of The Force Awakens, going back to the beginning of the podcast and that trailer and the soaring Star Wars themes, right? That sounds so emotional. But then you get to the promotion around The Last Jedi, and what is it? We're turning things on their head. This is going to be a different Star Wars. We heard that from the beginning in all the promotional material leading up to it. It's going to be different. You know, we're breaking down some of the norms. It's going to be shocking. It's in everything. That was the big spin around this. And you know what? They were absolutely right. But they gave, in my opinion, Rian Johnson the creative freedom, as so many of us have always said that have defended The Last Jedi and will continue to do so, because they knew they needed to grow the fandom. And you can't grow the fandom of anything without taking some risks. Be as authentic and as genuine as you can possibly be, and you'll reach the biggest audience you're capable of reaching. You don't grow if you just keep repeating the same thing over and over again. You have to challenge yourself. And I think part of the commentary around The Last Jedi that gets lost among the fandom that wants to continue to complain about that movie, nobody is forcing you to watch it, is the fact that for those of us that do love that film, and that's really what it is. I mean, for that movie, I think that movie reached a heck of a lot more people on a way more emotional level than The Force Awakens did, and I love The Force Awakens. What people fail to realize is that, well, but at what cost? At what cost did they reach out and really appease all of the fandom? Because you made so many people mad. But what you forget is when you reach somebody on that emotional level, that spreads more so to other people than if you just put out a good movie. You just put out a good film, and it's just a good movie. You don't really get to talking about it. There's nothing really to discuss. There's no more to be said. It was good. I liked it too. So did I. It was great. I really did. Okay, we're moving on. And you're not really sharing that with anybody. But if you hate something, you're certainly sharing it with people. But if it affects you emotionally and personally, you're going to share that with more people. How many more podcasts focused solely on Star Wars have been created in the wake of The Last Jedi? I would die to see that number. I would love to see somebody compile all the podcasts that have been created from all the podcasts created up until The Last Jedi and from then until now. I bet you would see an exponential growth. Now, some of that is negative. Some of that is because people want to be jerks and go on YouTube and do clickbaity titles, like based off of the Bob Iger comments. Look, this is proof of my secret sources that Rian Johnson is no longer working on Star Wars projects, and neither is Kathleen Kennedy, because he intentionally left out commenting on both of them in his commentary to The Hollywood Reporter, right? But how many other podcasts have came out? I mean, I could go into my Twitter, right, at My Nerd World, and the Rabble Alliance, Girls with Sabers. I mean, look, the list goes on and on and on of podcasts that I know that I've become connected with that have only started within the course of the past less than a year. Now, the other thing that I thought was interesting in what Christopher McQuarrie was talking about was the movie-going audience and where we're at. And this goes back to what I said at the beginning of the show. Before Jaws and Star Wars came out, you didn't really have a blockbuster. Afterwards, it was all about the blockbuster. These were event films with the ability to watch so many movies at home, with entertainment changing, as the director of Mission Impossible Fallout said. People are getting their emotional viewing experiences at home on the smaller screen, depending on the size of your TV. in things like Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad. Okay, so the movie-going audience is much different than it was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, you just went to the movies. You always went to the movies. Every Friday, I was going to the movies. I was going with myself, or I was going with somebody else, but we were going to the movies. That was just something you did. Well, kids don't do that anymore. They're really only going to the films if it's an event film. The words, well, I'll wait for it to come out on video. I'll wait for it to come out on streaming. Okay, that is being uttered more so than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so to get people out to the movie theater, you've got to present them with an event. Star Wars movies and films are events. Why are they events? Well, they're events for a number of reasons. But to me, the biggest reason when it comes to Star Wars, and this ties into my fascination of wanting to see how Disney handles new sagas to grab the audience, is that question of what's going to happen next. Okay? Star Wars was a huge blockbuster, A New Hope. And then, they're making a sequel to the biggest film of all time? Yeah, I'm on board. Wait, Han's frozen in carbonite? I gotta see Return of the Jedi. George Lucas is making prequels that we get to see the story of how a young Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader? We didn't think we were getting any of these films? Yeah, I'm on board. Didn't really like the Phantom Menace. Attack of the Clones, I don't know. But we gotta see Revenge of the Sith because this is where he becomes Vader. Then you take a break. Then what? Disney buys Lucasfilm. What? They're going to make more Star Wars movies? Force Awakens comes around. I got to see Star Wars The Force Awakens. This is brand new Star Wars. I didn't really like that. This is not me speaking. I'm playing average fan here. I'm playing average just person on the street. I didn't really care for the prequels, but I don't know, man. The trailer for that Star Wars movie is really tickling my nostalgia feels. I gotta go see what this is all about, just out of pure curiosity. Didn't they pull it off? Did they make a movie that was not going to destroy my childhood like the prequels did, right? And in large part it did. But what else did it do? At the end of that movie, wait, what? We only get to see Luke Skywalker for the last couple of minutes at the end of The Force Awakens and he doesn't say anything? What? I gotta see The Last Jedi. Now, Episode 9's got a number of different things going for it. One, for those that didn't like The Last Jedi, there's the, wonder if they can make another good Star Wars movie again. For those that did love The Last Jedi, is Reylo really going to happen? Not to mention, last film of the saga. What was it that Solo didn't have? Didn't have any of that. I'm sorry, Rogue One. Rogue One, what? We're going to find out how they sold the Death Star plans, and I hear there's a rumor that it might end right before A New Hope opens. That was the first Star Wars movie ever. I got to go and see that. Okay, you get what I'm saying. Solo didn't have that. I love Solo. The more I watch Solo, the more I love that film. I think I like it more than Rogue One, but that could change on a day-to-day basis depending on my mood and how much I've eaten. But Solo didn't have that. When people make I'm going to say it, that stupid comment of, this movie wasn't necessary. Well, you know what? Knucklehead, no movie is necessary, right? Okay. But what you really mean to say, in my opinion, because you're making yourself sound dumb, what you really mean to say is the movie isn't providing me with information that I was desperately seeking, right? I loved the film, but Solo didn't have the, why do I need to go see that? That's what it was missing. And that's a core element of what makes Star Wars Star Wars. What are we going to get? Look, for me, you come up with stuff. I wanted to see how the Falcon turned into the Falcon that we know and love based off of what we'd seen in the trailers, right? That was interesting. I did want to see I was curious to see how Chewie and Han got together. But were those things that I could have lived with and not let it bother me that we're linking out there, lingering questions? Yeah, absolutely. I didn't ever need to know those things. There are things that people need to know or feel like they need to know in Star Wars movies because of what's been laid out before it. But, Solo didn't have those things. On top of coming 6 months after The Last Jedi. So that's where I think, going all the way back around to Bob Iger's comments, that's where they didn't get it. That's where they messed up. I think if they had moved Solo to Christmas time, it probably would have done better. You would have had more build-up. You would have had more of a lead and time to promote it. But it still would have been still would have been weighted down by the lack of it being an event film. And this goes back to the data that was presented in that interview with Christopher McQuarrie on the Empire Film Podcast. The movie-going audience has changed. So, who went out to see Solo? Well, dudes like me, and taking their families. The really hardcore fans. We, I think, got an answer to, how big is the hardcore audience? Like, what's the minimal that a Star Wars movie can possibly make? I think we got our answer in Solo. Because a lot of people, including regular hardcore fans who were turned off by The Last Jedi, let's not lie here, but I don't think it was a huge number. But average people didn't need to rush out to see this film, and it was the only Star Wars movie, in my opinion, where you could legitimately say, and I'd be like, okay, I'll give it to you. I can wait to see that when it comes out on home video. I can wait to see that when it comes out on streaming. For almost every other Star Wars film, you'd say that and be like, yeah, man, but don't you want to be the first to find out how they sold the Death Star plans? Yeah, man, but don't you want to see what Disney did to Star Wars? Yeah, man, don't you want to see Luke actually talk in a Star Wars film? How Disney and Lucasfilm handles that moving forward in the Star Wars creative content gets me excited. We'll do listener feedback on next week's show, but let's wrap up on this. This whole podcast has been building to this moment, and why I'm actually happy to hear about. While I'll take all the Star Wars content I can get, the bickering is tiring, right? Okay, but while I'll take all the Star Wars content that Disney and Lucasfilm wants to throw at me, I do understand the need to slow down. And their rationale for slowing down, if it aligns with my headcanon rationale, is a good thing. Disney needed to find out, and maybe they have, and I think the people at Lucasfilm are smart enough to know this. Star Wars needs to hit you in the feels. It needs to be a franchise where you go, I got to see what happens next. What's the next part of this saga? And I think that's why people were so upset at the killing off of Snoke, because that's a character that people were getting into really quickly. And Rian Johnson did a great job with Snoke, but they wanted to have that. They wanted to be able to look at Snoke going into 9 and go, ooh, what's Snoke going to do next? And that was kind of taken away from them. It's fine. It's justified. I'm cool with it. But I think that's part of the reason why. So if they're going to slow down the films to not make the mistake that they did with Solo, then I think they're wising up that we need to make sure that we are telling stories that Star Wars fans feel like cannot be missed, and not just the hardcore fans, but the general public at large. And that's what The Last Jedi did so well. That's why you have so many people saying, boy, they got a lot to wrap up in Episode 9, when the reality is, if you really look at it, they really don't. But that's what was so masterful about what Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi, is how he made it seem like there was a lot, but no. We need to wrap up the story of the First Order, right? We need to wrap up the story of Rey and Ben and figure out how we're going to bring peace and justice to the entire galaxy and how this whole thing plays out. Ben's redemption, right? Right? Is that what we're saying, right? Thank you so much for checking out the show again this week. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. My soon-to-be-released all-original sci-fi space opera novel should be coming here in the next 2 months. If you want to be the first to find out everything about it, sign up on the email list using TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Leave a comment on YouTube. You can find the show. Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, YouTube, iTunes. I don't think I missed anything there. Again, you can... at The My Nerd World, at Jon Justice. Find me on Facebook as well. Can't wait to talk to you again next week. Looking forward. I got my Blu-ray. Should be arriving hopefully either today or tomorrow, so I can watch more Solo on my big screen here at home. Until then, have yourself a fantastic week, and we'll talk to you again in about 7 days. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.